Hi guys, welcome back to Chaitanya online classes. Okay dear student, in last class also we discussed about that how that medium required to transfer that sound. Okay, let's some topic we discussed in that last class. And that next it is amplitude, frequency, time period, loudness, pitch, audible and inaudible sound. So we are going to be study all these topics in this class. So for that, first one is amplitude. If you consider the graph of that vibrations, if you consider the graph of that sound vibrations, these are vibrations. How those are vibrated? That vibrations are nothing but to and fro motion. So some particles are vibrated up and down. Okay, so this is the graph is showing that vibrations of the particle of that sound. Here it is equilibrium position. This is a line of propagation. This is a mean position, or we also call this as a mean position. This object is at mean position. When that vibration starts, so they will get displaced. They will get displaced and they will reach here. Okay. So next, after they will come back to their mean position here. So that amplitude means the maximum displacement or distance moved by the particle from its mean position. This is, we call it as amplitude. This we call it as amplitude. Amplitude means the maximum distance covered by that particle, moved by that particle from its mean position, that we call it as amplitude. Okay, so that vibrations are too higher. So if that amplitude is this much, okay, it means that sound we can call it as loudness. That loudness of the sound is depend on the amplitude. If amplitude increases, means that sound is loud. That is loud. So that loudness is depend on the amplitude. Okay? And this loudness is measured in the unit called decibel. So this we can measure in decibel. This is as the unit of that sound. That okay? Amplitude means what? It is the maximum distance moved by that object. Okay? If that object, if we consider this as a sound source, so here that energy is transmitted to the particles. Here that particles are get rushed. This is rarefaction, this is compression, this is rarefaction, compression. In which that particles move here and come back to here. It transfer its energies to here, again come back to here. So during its moment of these particles, the maximum distance covered by these particles. So here we can represent it like this, because these are what to and fro motion. So initially this is at mean position. So this is the distance covered by particles. Okay, this we call it as amplitude. Understood, student? Amplitude means, so what? That maximum distance covered by that particles during transfer of energy to the neighboring particle, that we call it as amplitude. That loudness of the wave means one crust and one drum. Or one compression, the number of compression and that rate fraction together we call it as wave. Okay. Frequency means that number of cycle, that number of waves produced per second. Okay. If this is a time period, okay, time period. So here how many cycles we have? 1, 2. 2 waves we have. This up to here, if you consider again, if it extend this graph, here this is 1 second. Next after this is next second. Okay. So there are how many waves are there? 2 waves. One compression, one rate pressure, or one crust, one trap. Together we call it as one wave. So how many waves are there? 2 waves are there. So that frequency means that number of waves produced per second. Number of waves, sound waves produced in 1 second. In 1 second, that we call it as frequency. If that 20 waves are produced in 1 second, means that we can say that as frequency is 20. Frequency of that sound is 20. So that unit we use to measure that frequency is hertz. This is the name of this hertz. It is SI unit of that frequency. If a 20 cycles are produced in 1 second, means that the frequency of that sound is 20 hertz. 20 hertz. Frequency means number of cycles produced in 1 second. If a 2 cycles produced, that is frequency is a 2 hertz. If a 20 cycles produced per second, that frequency of that sound wave is what? 20 hertz. Okay, like this. Okay, so for it is for low. That we can see this as a lower frequency. That the sound drum has low frequency because that waves are only 2 here. Some cycles are like this. So if we consider this as a 1 second, here the number of cycles are as compared to this has a more number of cycles. So we can say this as a high frequency wave, high frequency sound. This is we consider it as a low frequency wave. So low and high, how do you define that? On the basis of number of cycles produced in 1 second. Here it is how many cycles are produced? 1, here 2, it is 3, here it is 4. Okay, here 2 only. So like this, that number of cycles increases, that time we can say it as high frequency sound. If that sounds have that number of that cycles are less, that we can say it as 1 or 2. Such a sound we can say it as low frequency sound. So that low frequency, that it is depend on that what? Low sound and that high sound is depend on the number of frequencies, that number of waves produced. Okay, frequency means that number of cycles produced per second. And time period means the time taken to complete 1 cycle. Okay, to complete 1 cycle, the time taken by the wave to make a 1 cycle, that we call it as time period. So how much time this particle is take to complete its 1 cycle, that we call it as time period. Okay, so time period means time taken to complete complete one cycle or one wave. One wave that we call it as frequency, that time period. So that time period and frequency has a relation like this. Frequency equal to 1 divided by time period. It means frequency increases, time decreases. Here see, number of frequency increases. Here this is, we call it as time period here. That time taken to complete one cycle, that we call it as time period. So here it is what, number of frequency increases, the time period goes on decreases. It takes a less time to make up one cycle. So here it is what, frequency decreases here, time increases. Okay, it takes greater time, that more time to make up one cycle than this. So as compared to this low frequency sound and high frequency sound, in 1 second it can produce a 4 cycle. Means for each cycle it takes a less time as compared to this. Here it takes 1 second for making 2 cycles. Means that time taken by a particle to make 1 second is more than this. Okay, if a frequency increases, time taken to complete a 1 cycle is decreases. So this is that relation between frequency and time period. So leave it on, just remember this one. The time period means that time taken to make a one complete cycle, that we call it as a time period. Frequency is nothing but it is number of cycles produced per second, that we call it as frequency. Okay dear students, leave it off, we just take these two definitions only. Okay, that time period, it is SI unit of time period, it is second. Okay, next, that pitch is depend on frequencies. If number of frequency increases, so that we can say it as that sound has a high pitch sound. It is depend on, pitch is depend on frequency. So if number of frequency is less, means that time we can say it as less pitch sound. It has less pitch sound. For example, if you take a drum sound, beating of drum, so it has what? Less pitch, because that number of frequency produced per second is less. So that sound we call it as a beating of drum is less pitch. And if you take a whistle, okay, so that is what we call it as, that sound has a high pitch. High pitch means that number of frequencies is more. So that time we can say it as that the sound of that whistle as high pitch sound. Okay, that pitch is depend on the frequencies. If a number of frequencies increases, that sound we call it as a high pitch sound. If the number of frequencies decreases, that sound we call it as a less pitch sound. Okay dear students, very good. Next, audible and inaudible sound. So that we are human being, we cannot hear all the types of sound. Some animals are there, they can hear that sound, and but we cannot, that human being we cannot. So the sound we call it as a audible sound, and we cannot hear that sound, we call it as an inaudible sound. So audible sound means it has frequency between 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. 20,000 Hz. Okay? So that sound of more than 20,000 Hz or less than 20 Hz frequency sound we cannot hear. If a sound has a frequency below 20 Hz, that we call it as the inaudible frequency. Means we cannot hear the sound. So it is that human being can hear, that we call it as an audible frequency. If a sound human being we cannot hear that sound, that we call it as an inaudible frequency. So inaudible frequency range is what? That below 20 Hz we cannot hear sound of frequency below 20 Hz, and above 20,000 Hz. Above 20,000 Hz we cannot hear, that we call it as inaudible sound. So how do you define audible and inaudible? Audible sound means that sound of frequency is between 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. That sound we call it as audible sound, and sound of frequency below 20 Hz and above the 20,000 Hz, that we call it as inaudible frequency. Understood, students? Okay. So that some dogs and some animals are there, they can hear that sound above 20,000 Hz frequency. Okay, but we cannot, human being. Okay. This is all about audible and inaudible and loudness speech. So what do you mean by amplitude? Amplitude is nothing but it is that maximum distance. Maximum distance covered by that particles. Okay, that we call from its mean position, that we call it as a amplitude. So that amplitude can determine the loudness of the sound. So how much is that sound loud? So that is depend on the amplitude, and the unit we use to that we tell to that sound, that we call it as what? Decibel. It is a SI unit of a sound. It is decibel, dB. And frequency means the number of cycles produced in 1 second, that we call it as frequency. If 20 cycles are produced in 1 second, that 20 Hz is represented as the frequency of that sound. If 20,000 is produced, then we call it as frequency of that sound. Okay, so that next time period is nothing but time taken to complete one cycle. To make a one cycle, that we call it as a time period. The relation between the frequency and time is F equal to 1 by T. It means frequency increases, time period decreases. Okay, so they are inversely proportional, and that pitch is depend, that the frequency can determine the pitch or shrillness of the sound. Okay, if the number of frequency increases, it means that sound has a high pitch sound. So if that number of frequencies are lower, that sound we call it as a low pitch sound. Okay, next audible means that sound of frequency from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz are called as audible frequency sound, audible sound. And inaudible means that sound of frequency below 20 Hz and more than above the 20,000 Hz are called as inaudible sound. Okay, dear student, this is all about today's concept. Okay, write the definitions in your textbook. You have the definitions of all those, so you should make a notes. Okay, write a notes and read the textbook. If you have any doubt, if you didn't understand anything, you can call me. So I will tell you once again in that next class. I will explain it again if you don't understand. Okay, you can call me. I will explain you again. Okay, so dear students, read and write. Stay safe, stay home. Okay, thank you. Take care. Thank you, dear students. Bye.